Sabrina M. Steinberg. Angels Feud, the Devil's Game. It all began in the magnificent city of Kallenburg, which was ruled by the powerful and hard-hearted King Esther of Kallenburg I. In an era when knights earned their titles through infamy and disgrace, many a hypocritical clergyman succumbed to beer, and royal couples assassinated one another, the small, idyllic village of Weihendahl was founded. Belief in demons and spirits was still widespread, but peace was soon to come to an end, for almost imperceptibly, a black shadow was spreading its wings. The Stranger. It was a starry night, and the small village of Weihendahl had settled down for the night. The burning pitch torches and simple lanterns cast only a faint glow over the gravel paths. Inside the houses, the lights slowly went out, and a crescent moon appeared in the starry sky. Alexandra knelt on the floor, her face turned toward the wall. A strong hand gripped her shoulder from behind, while the other hand pried her mouth open. The hand reached inside, all the way to her throat. Alexandra felt completely helpless, she gasped and choked. She felt dizzy and was on the verge of fainting. Something was taken from her, but it was not her tongue. She did not know what was happening to her, and fear paralyzed her. The hand had taken something from her, something invisible, her soul. Her vision went black, and her body, from which all life seemed to have fled, sank to the floor. Her eyes were wide open, staring at the gray, cold wall, completely empty, soulless. The first rays of sunlight were already streaming in through the round gable window when Alexandra, drenched in sweat, awoke from her nightmare at the sound of her mother's cries. Her long, red hair lay spread out on the pillow, and her dark, almond-shaped eyes blinked in the sunlight. She wiped the sweat from her forehead and felt relieved, for it had been only a terrible dream, one of those gruesome visions that often made her shudder, yet rarely had it seemed as real to her as it did this time. Alexandra could still hear the echoing voice in her mind. Deeply hidden behind your gates, where life is never death and the dawn, the flames blaze eternally, and never fear death. It seemed to her to be part of a poem. She was sure she had heard it before, but then everything literally vanished behind a wall of fog, and even though she was lying under a thick comforter, goosebumps came over her. The sunbeams illuminating the small room and the birdsong comforted her as she got up. It was the day before the moon festival, and Alexandra's parents were already full of anticipation and busily engaged in the preparations. Her father, Harold, went out right away with her younger brothers to tend to the house and yard. Alexandra herself left the half-timbered house with the green shutters and the small, overgrown garden shortly thereafter. Her gaze immediately fell on the village square in front of it and the two girls from the neighborhood with whom she was supposed to go mushroom and berry picking in the nearby forest. While Alexandra's mother, Martha, was already feeding the free-roaming pigs in the yard, Alexandra slung her quiver and shortbow over her shoulder, then grabbed the wicker basket, inside which an old, rusty knife was hidden for her protection. A short while later, as she made her way through the moss-scented forest, it seemed to welcome her with the cheerful chirping of birds and the foxes and deer that appeared now and then. Small twigs and dried leaves crunched beneath her ankle-high lace-up shoes, and ravens cawed down from the tall treetops. Margarethe and Elizabeth immediately began gathering wild berries. Alexandra had decided to leave the sisters alone for a while to go mushroom hunting on one of the nearby wooded hills, though she didn't want to lose sight of them. After assigning the girls their tasks, she soon reached the spot where the wild mushrooms grew. The murmur of the river receded into the distance. She set down her quiver and bowed to set to work eagerly on gathering mushrooms. But no sooner had she begun than she heard the snorting of a horse behind her. When she turned around, she saw a magnificent black horse with an unusually glossy coat, whose rider was just about to dismount. Surprised, Alexandra scrutinized the slender, tall man, for she hadn't heard any horse hooves at all. His burgundy silk cloak was held together by a striking golden brooch. His gray-green eyes stood out against his narrow, feminine-looking face. His dark brown hair was long and curly. She had never before encountered such an interesting man, his clothing and sword told her that she was in the presence of a nobleman. "Could you perhaps tell me if this is the right way to Kallenburg?" Alexandra couldn't help but stare at him and had to swallow the lump in her throat before answering in an uncertain voice. "Yes, stay on this path until you reach the fork, and then just follow the Kila that will take you straight to Kallenburg." She pointed toward the river, but did not take her eyes off the stranger. With a smile that seemed arrogant and an eager gaze, he spoke to her again. "Aren't you afraid, all alone in the forest?" Alexandra began to feel uneasy. She got goosebumps and grew increasingly uncertain. "No, I'm not alone, my brothers and my father are very close by." Her quiver and bow seemed close enough to touch, yet out of reach. Looking at her suspiciously, he moved slowly toward her. "But I haven't seen anyone far and wide." A blush of shame spread across her face as she felt caught in a lie. But no sooner had he stood right in front of her than he wrapped his left arm around her waist, pulled her toward him, and tried to kiss her. Her heart was pounding in her throat, but she still pushed him away. When she then tried to slap him, he grabbed her wrist in a flash and squeezed it with surprising force. It was only a brief moment, but it seemed like an eternity to her. She almost collapsed to her knees and was about to scream, in pain, before he very gradually released her wrist. His light eyes and the expression on his face seemed so cold and frightening to her that, for a brief moment, Alexandra was frozen in place. Without a word, she slung the quiver over her shoulder. Then grabbed her bow and basket before running off in confusion. "Run, Alexandra, run. And take good care of yourself." Once Alexandra had gotten a little farther away, she turned around once more to make sure he wasn't following her. She was amazed that someone could disappear so abruptly and silently, and she was also surprised that her wrist was already bright red and aching after such a brief grip. Alexandra's heart was still racing, and with a sense of unease, she ran back to look for her sisters. She stopped, puzzled, when she reached the spot where she had left the two girls earlier. She looked around searchingly, wondering where the girls could have gone. For this was undoubtedly the place where they had been picking berries. "Margarethe, Elizabeth. Where are you?" She called out into the silent forest. It had become suspiciously quiet, unusually so. The silence felt almost oppressive. Hastily, she rummaged through the basket of mushrooms to pull out the old knife. The sun was already low on the horizon and would soon set. She wondered where the day had gone as she hurried back to the village, almost in a panic, with the basket in one hand and the knife in the other. In a shaky voice, she called out to her sisters again, but it remained suspiciously quiet. Just a few breaths later, she heard the sound of horses' hooves. Strangers seemed to be approaching. But when Alexandra realized a moment later that, to her relief, it was her father and the Northman Trondon, she breathed a sigh of relief, and even the forest, which had seemed so menacing just moments before, seemed to come back to life. A light breeze picked up, gently playing with the foliage of the trees, and the forest birds tried to compete with their melodious song against the cawing of the ravens. The two men, who were all too familiar to her, scrutinized her as they dismounted from their horses. The Northman was of considerable height and stature. His long, blonde hair was streaked with fine gray strands, and his face was marked by age and past battles. 20 years earlier, he had arrived in Weihendahl with his wife after they had fled the Northlands. His beloved wife, Frida, had left him at the birth of their son, and he had remained alone ever since. For many years now, he had led the Brotherhood of the Seven, even though he believed the days of heroic battles seemed to be over for him. Alexandra, however, skillfully avoided his steely gaze, as she usually felt uneasy in the presence of this attractive, imposing man, while her father looked at her with concern. Alexandra silently blamed herself for the disappearance of the two young girls. At that moment, her self-reproach threatened to tear her apart. The situation eased. However, after she learned from the two that the siblings had rushed back to the village, worried. Alexandra herself hadn't noticed that so much time had passed. A short while later, she was riding alongside Trondon on his white horse, with her father Harold riding his plow horse beside them. Riding past birches, oaks, and firs, she had long since made up a story for the two of them, though she hadn't mentioned the stranger. The fire at the cooking spot on the stone platform was slowly dying down, and the smell of stew filled the air as the family sat down to dinner in the early evening. Harold was the first to finish and thoughtfully set his horn spoon aside. "Our village messenger, Caspar, came back from town today and told us that a young woman has gone missing there. Traces of blood were found in her house. Her small child, however, is said to be unharmed. Half the town must have been searching for the mother, but there's no trace of her." He paused thoughtfully before continuing his story. "That very same night, one of the city guards was found hanging from a tree, horribly mutilated and with his feet first, no less. They say it was the devil himself, a beast running amok here." Benedict's eyes widened, and he looked frightened. "What does the devil look like, father?" Harold shrugged awkwardly and waved his hands around. "Well, just like the devil looks. Terrifying, with horns or something not human, that's for sure." His two sons just stared at him with wide eyes and didn't dare say another word. "We all need to be a little more careful now and make sure we protect ourselves. No one is allowed to go into the forest alone anymore, and certainly not at night. And we have to arm ourselves with whatever we have, from pitchforks to knives. Whatever happened in the town, it's still not far enough away for us not to worry." His stomach churned at the thought that something so horrific could happen to someone in his family. The dinner was then finished in silence. The narrow half-timbered houses cast long shadows in the morning sunlight as Alexandra and Helena reached the village square. To their surprise, they immediately spotted Marcus, who was dismounting from his horse in knightly garb. His chestnut brown, medium-length hair blew in the light breeze. He wore a long chain-mail shirt and, over it, a white cloak bearing the king's coat of arms with the golden crown. He, too, belongs to the Brotherhood of the Seven. He pressed a silver thaler into the hand of a young stable boy, who immediately began tending to his brown horse with its glossy coat and long mane. Helena could hardly take her eyes off Marcus, while he seemed to be ignoring her. Alexandra strode toward her brother with a smug smile. "Well, little brother, found your way home again?" With a charming smile. He brushed his hair out of his face. "As you can see, I've been named a Knight of Honor by the Queen, and I'm glad to finally be back home after this long journey." "What a surprise, but then I suppose you won't be staying here long now that you're a knight." Marcus smiled. "You'll have to put up with me for a little while longer, sister. As a knight, I've actually taken some time off," he explained proudly. Alexandra looked at him in bewilderment, for she had never heard of such a thing before. "Queen Theodora, of course, King Nestor has agreed, and I can stay in Weihendahl for a little while." Alexandra raised her eyebrows in surprise, while Helena still stood before him with an awkward smile. Too embarrassed to say a word. They had no idea that Marcus had been knighted so unexpectedly because he was having an affair with the Queen and had earned the title of knight through the strength of his loins, but he kept that a closely guarded secret. Marcus had no intention of putting Queen Theodora in danger and knew all too well that the king would kill him and everyone else in a cruel manner if he ever found out. "I see, a break. Well, then you surely have a lot to tell us." Alexandra was already eager to hear his stories, for she would have loved to know what her brother had experienced during his years of travel. He looked around boredly and suppressed a yawn. Later. The village square was adorned mostly with intricately crafted half-timbered houses with clay or slate roofs. The few wooden buildings belonging to the Northmen, set further back, and a handful of old shacks were the exception. Marcus watched the screaming children running around and the gossiping old women standing by the well. The stench of cow and horse manure stung his nose, and seagulls circled over the lake. He briefly grimaced. Nothing's changed here at all. Meanwhile, in the nearby town of Kallenburg, another gruesome murder had taken place, and a young woman had also vanished without a trace, yet, although the villagers were uneasy, They weren't about to let that spoil their celebrations. Late in the evening, Marcus had traded his uncomfortable knight's garb for everyday clothes as they sat together comfortably in the tavern. The guests were chatting animatedly, and laughter drifted over to them, while an older woman tried to be heard above the noise with her rebeck. Burning torches hung on the walls, a large fire blazed in the fireplace, and there was no shortage of candles either. The women of the tavern served in their black skirts and low-cut blouses. The tables were already set with food and drink. "Tell me, Jack, what's that wooden box for that you attached to our house wall this morning?" Siegfried asked curiously. Jack immediately perked up, while one of the women serving him poured him another beer. "Oh, it's a message box, a new invention of mine." "Right. What?" Siegfried didn't think he'd heard correctly. "It's, what?" "Well, it's a small wooden box where you can leave messages. Let's say a messenger were to come and want to deliver a message to us, and we happen to be out, then he could just drop the scroll in, and we wouldn't miss a thing. Right?" "What?" The Irishman looked on expectantly, hoping for more recognition from his companions. "I still don't get this box thing." It was obvious that Siegfried couldn't follow his ideas. Thoughtfully, he reached for his mug and drained it in one gulp. Even Marcus, who could hardly wait to enjoy himself with the two petite dancers sitting on his lap, pricked up his ears. "And how is the messenger supposed to know that this is a box for messages?" Jack sighed heavily. "I give up." Any further explanation seemed pointless to him, since his companions clearly didn't have much time for his inventiveness or appreciation. Henning, Trondon's son, who looked just like him now, joined them as well. Trondon shook his head with a smile, lost in thought, as he rolled his dice across the table. The giant Norse man Håkon had also joined them in the meantime. Although his corpulent build was extremely imposing, his expression was usually friendly. Though his intellect was that of a child. He had once fled the north after slaying his enemies who had murdered his parents and siblings with a blacksmith's hammer. His wife was all he had left. Fate had led him to the Kallenburg region. There he had later met Trondon, with whom he had been working together in the smithy ever since. Siegfried, who looked pensive, raised his mug and then looked at Jack, who was sitting directly across from him. "As long as you don't get so caught up in your inventions and wooden crates that you forget we're supposed to go to the guildmaster's meeting, Jack," he said, snapping the Irishman out of his reverie as they raised their beer mugs to make a ceremonial toast. Marcus smiled, thinking about how much he had missed his companions. They finished their game of dice and left the tavern in high spirits. End part 1.